I need my neighbor's children to be okay so that my children will be okay. I need all of my neighbor's children to be okay. Poor inner city children in Atlanta and poor children of Appalachia. I need the poor children of Israel and the poor children of Gaza. I need Israelis and Palestinians. I need those in the Congo, those in Haiti, those in Ukraine. I need American children on both sides of the track to be okay. Because we are all God's children. And so let's stand together. Let's work together. Let's organize together. Let's pray together. Let's stand together. Let's heal the land. God bless you. Keep the faith and keep looking up.
I'm here with Terrell Starr of the Black Diplomats podcast and Substack, who is in Kiev, Ukraine. We are joined today by Ross Morales-Rocketto, the lead organizer of White Dudes for Harris, which drew more than 200,000 participants from all 50 states while raising $4.5 million for the Harris-Walz Campaign. Ross is also the co-founder and co-executive director of Run for Something, which recruits and supports the next generation of young, diverse, and progressive political leaders. To date, Run for Something has helped elect more than 1,000 young people from across the country, and they are on the Gaslit Nation Action Guide, 2024 Survival Guide. Ross lives in Washington, D.C. with his partner, Jess, their dog, Nacho, and their cat, Baby Kitty. That is so cute because my cat is named Baby Cat, so we have a lot to talk about today. And Ross is here to provide me and Terrell with reparations for centuries of white male oppression. Thank you so much. Terrell and I accept Patreon and Substack.
What about Square Cash and Venmo?
We prefer Substack and Patreon.
Yeah, right.
So thank you. I mean, I feel my wounds of misogyny just healing right up.
Yeah, we happy to have you, man. Like, we definitely, when we saw you saw the Black women doing their thing, and then you saw, I think it was Black men, then the Latino women did their thing, and then like the white man came out. I'm like, oh shit, the white man is coming. This is going to sound funny, but I'm like, damn, I don't think the white man ever came to my rescue before. Then here we are,
That's what we're trying to fix over here, to be honest. So maybe in the future, the white men will be better allies.
Well, we want to learn all about how it all came together. But I want to just point out, like, honestly, if I were a white man, I would just be like, dude, I need a break. I need to just sit, I need a vacation for like an era or two, like a millennial or two, like let all these other people take over and do the work. Like, why wouldn't you want that?
I mean, I think we do. I think the piece here that, and part of like the reason why like we ended up doing it was because the last two elections, Donald Trump has won white men with 60% of the vote, if more in 2016. And we were trying to create space for white men to feel like they can be a part of the Democratic Party and not just sit on the sidelines, but actively support. And I think we're in a really beautiful moment where they're not doing it for another white dude. They're not doing it for Hillary Clinton. They're doing it for the person who will be, hopefully, the first Black, the first South Asian, the first woman president. And I think that was something that was really special about the call. And honestly, we didn't totally know how many people were going to get on. We didn't know how it was going to be received. I was talking to one of the organizers recently, and we were having a conversation about how the way that everyone else felt about it when they first heard about it was the way that our little organizing committee felt when I approached them about it, like about 6 days before we actually did the call, to be like, hey, do you guys want to do a white dudes call? So I think, to be honest, I think everyone kind of felt the same way at the very beginning.
Wow.
What are some takeaways from the call that you really, some things that surprised you, some things that you learned that will help you to organize moving forward?
The first thing is I wasn't sure about the appetite. there were a lot of other calls that happened. White women did their call. There was one with Black women. There was one with Black men. And I would say the way that it came together was I was at dinner with a friend while I was on a work trip in San Francisco. And I asked, like, who's doing the white dude call? And his response was nobody. And I was like, does that mean we have to do the white dude call?
Yes, it does.
And it did. And the appetite for it, I think, was something that I theorized existed, but I wasn't totally sure. The other piece of it that really surprised me was we broke out of like the DC, New York, LA, San Francisco bubble. Like we actually were talking and we had people from all over the country participate. When we went back through and looked at the 70,000 donations that came in through the call, we found that 51% of the folks who made contributions were in swing states or deep red states. And they were in all 50 states across the country. And so I think a thing that we ended up seeing was it was bigger than I think any of us could have anticipated. And then, you know, we heard a lot of anecdotal stories. There was one of the people who was really helpful in organizing the call was in rural Wisconsin at the time in a town of like 14,000 people at a diner. And there were people at that diner talking about the White Dudes for Harris call at the next week over.
And the New York Times failed to send any reporter to actually talk to them. Meanwhile, every story that the Times ran in 2016 was like a Nazi in a diner or a Nazi buying like pasta sauce in the grocery store. The Nazis, they're just like us. We got to listen to them.
You know, it would be nice if they would go out and hear the good things happening in diners in rural Wisconsin. I'm not holding my breath that the New York Times is going to do that this election cycle, though.
No, they don't have a financial interest. So I want to just read a stat to you from polls capturing this moment in time that we're in. White working class voters with no college education are leaving Trump for Kamala Harris.
It's awesome. And I think there's a couple of things that are at play here. The first is when Joe Biden decided he wasn't going to run again, or when Nancy Pelosi decided for him. And he like very bravely, and I decided to step back. He fulfilled the promise he made in his first campaign, which was to be a bridge to the next generation. And everybody for the last 2 years had gotten used to the idea that this was the election we were going to have. And the election was going to really be about the past. Because even though Joe Biden has been a consequential president, he's still 82 years old, and he's still a representation, not even of the baby boomer generation, but of the silent generation, the one that came before it. And so I think we'd all sort of resigned ourselves. And the moment that Vice President Harris got endorsed by him, the moment he, made the announcement about stepping back, I think it like breathed new life into not just the Democratic Party itself, but I think to just a lot of voters who wanted a different option. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of this energy come from. People want their elections to be about the future. They don't want them to be about the past. And Kamala Harris represents the future in like, no matter what way you look at it, like from an intersectional lens, she does represent the future of America. And I think people are really excited by it. I mean, like, look, I thought that this was how it was going to work out, not because like I'm prescient, but just because like that's what I was hearing. And I think I was expecting to feel relieved a little bit. But what actually ended up happening is I got really, really excited, which I did not expect to get. In part because, like, I'm just like personally, I am further to the left than Kamala Harris is from my own personal political standpoint. So, like, if you were asking me, like, in a primary, like, would I vote for her? I don't know, because, like, I'm just like a little bit further to the left. And the moment it became clear that it was going to be her, I got really, really excited. And I didn't I didn't see it coming. I've had a lot of conversations with other people like from across the political spectrum who have sort of reported feeling the exact same way. They were like, yeah, like, we thought we were, going to be like relieved. Now we like feel like we have a chance at winning the election. And then basically all of them were like, I ended up feeling really excited and like really trying to ask myself, like, what am I going to do in this moment to help get her elected?
Mm.
You mentioned that Harris gives people something to look forward to, a future to look forward to. I'm curious, based on what you have been hearing, what specifically about this Black woman and her vision for the future gives these white men a feeling of trust that they can invest in her? Because I spent much of my time covering Black media and Black voters, right? And one of the things that I was never able to even culturally understand is how white men, particularly poor white men, think about politics. And I remember going to West Virginia to do some reporting on the opioid epidemic down there. And I spent a good week going around West Virginia, a very beautiful state full of dirt poor white people who in many instances grew up in more disparaging circumstances than I did, or as bad. And as ignorant as this is going to sound to you, Ross, I honestly never thought that white men or white men in power would allow another white person to get this far down to poverty. I genuinely did not. I thought that was just reserved for us as Black people. As a Black man, I'm used to being treated like shit and people thinking about us in this negative way. But you mentioned something that really restuck to me, is that she is giving these particular men some hope for the future. What on earth is that from her that emanates with these white men that we have not seen in my lifetime ever for any Black person? Because, and we can even include Obama in that.
I think there's a couple of things going on. The first is a thing that we do know is that the majority of white men are like not actually MAGA Republicans. Now, at the same time, the Democratic Party very like on a holistic level has also not been going like trying to win them over. Now, a lot of ads feel like they are made for white men, and they're actually not really made for white men at the same time, if that makes sense. They're like really poll tested, they're focus grouped, but like they're not tapping into, and I think this is something that Donald Trump does well and has done well, is he's really good at the vibes. He's like a vibes president. His team, I'm sure, is looking at the polls, but like he's not really looking at the polls. He's going off the vibes and how people are responding to him at his rallies. Like that's really how and like what he sees on Twitter, that's how he's calibrating. And I think a couple of things have happened. One, I think the vibes are immaculate right now. Like truly, I'm not sure I've ever seen vibes like this except in 2008, but it was different. There was an innocence to the vibes in 2008, and there's sort of like a hard-won excitement in 2024. We all have like the scars to go with it, and we're all really excited. So it's euphoric, but it's tempered in some ways. So I think one is I think there's just like the vibes out there are good, and like people respond to vibes. A thing that I often hear people talk about is like, you need to, especially in marketing, is like you need to tell people how to feel. And oftentimes if you tell them how to feel, they will feel that way. And I think that has sort of happened by accident here. But then I think the piece that has been really good is I think Harris and her team were ready to respond to it. So I think that's one piece. I think there's a second piece going on, which is joy. And people are really tired of the dour, cynical version of politics that they've been getting. And people would rather have joy. They just would. And people don't want that in their politics anymore. And then I think, and she's actually a really good avatar for that. She leans into that really well. Like the best Trump could do for a while was talk about her laugh. Like, it just, that's lame. It didn't stick.
Laughing easily is a sign of emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And I think people want that in their leader. They don't like want their leader to be serious all the time. And I think I think there's another thing that sort of is a different side of that coin that's happening here as well, which is people like what the Democratic policies. Like when you do polling and you poll on policy, people like our policies. But voters don't like us. They don't like Democrats because we're not fun. They think we're judging them. And in many cases, we are judging them. And so I think a thing that she is tapping into and her campaign is tapping into and doing it well is she's fun. She's out there having a good time. And people want to see that from their politics. You know, there was a reason that Barack Obama won 2 elections that weren't particularly competitive beyond the economy collapsing. And like, it was because like he was fun. He tapped into something that was cultural. He was inspirational. He gave people hope. He was about the future. And she's tapping into some of the same things right now as well. I think a thing that is really hard to overstate, and I think we saw this a little bit from Hillary Clinton's speech at the DNC on the first night, in the way that she was received in the arena. It's very different than the way that she got received when she was a candidate often. And I think Hillary Clinton took a lot of the shit for a woman candidate running for president that Kamala is still going to get and is getting, but it is less bad. It will be less bad for her because of the things that Hillary Clinton went through. And so I think that speech also sort of represented like a little bit of a passing of the torch. It was really beautiful. I got to see it in person and that was lovely. And then I think probably the last part of it is, you know, again, we know most white men are not MAGA conservatives. We haven't been talking to them. I think they feel like there could be a space for them right now in the Democratic Party, in part because they are looking at Donald Trump and they're like, he's the only one who's he's the only one who has been talking to me. And also, I don't like this. And now, like, also, you know, now that we're seeing more of Trump, they're also looking at Trump and being like, this man is 78 years old and isn't looking so hot. And also Kamala comes with a lot of, she's a prosecutor, she's tough. She comes with a lot of like that vibe. She comes with a lot of that vibe as well, which I think also sort of resonates with like a bunch of white men. I think she has a double standard because she's a woman, so she can't be too tough. And that's a challenge. And it's unfortunate and sucks that she's going to have to deal with it, but she is. And I think where that's really going to show up in is the debate. She's going to have to beat Donald Trump, but she can't kick his ass too hard, to be honest, because then some of those white men will get upset. So I think
they'll get upset regardless.
I think a lot of them will. I think there are many out there who are open to a conversation about it. And that's part of what White Dudes for Harris was about. And that's part of what we're going to continue to try to do through the rest of the cycle is create space for some of these folks and be able to have real conversations about some of the things that they're going to see and probably say and do, and, you know, have that exist in a space where folks aren't feeling judged, but like we can have real conversations with each other.
So we just saw riots rip apart parts of the UK over disinformation, racist, fascist movements. It reminded me so much of the black shirt riots in the UK in the 1920s and 1930s during the rise of Mussolini and Hitler, and what a big impact that had on the British establishment. And they had it now. And after the far right took a bit of a shellacking in that election and Labour had a huge comeback. So I think for us here in the US, former Gaslit Nation guest, the investigative journalist Carol Cadwalader, she's in London. She wrote a great piece in The Guardian saying, look at what happened here in Britain. Get ready, America. So what will White Dudes for Harris do should we have a President Kamala Harris? We saw the birther movement in response to President Obama. And so there's always this white rage backlash every time non-white people make progress. And this is going to be one of the biggest leaps we've ever made, a Black woman. So are you guys going to stay in formation in the years ahead to try to diffuse this ticking time bomb and continue these conversations? And what plan do you have should there be another type of Charlottesville event?
Yeah, my hope is that in some way, shape, or form we will. We haven't gotten that far. We're trying to get, through the next 70 whatever days we're at. I think 70, whatever it is. And I think the place that we want to be at is we want to hold space for these conversations, to have them in ways that folks feel like they can actually share, and that there can be an honest exchange between folks, because I think that's the only way that this work actually happens and sticks over time. I'm a big believer in, I've been organizing for the last 25, 30 years of my life in some way, shape, or form. And one of the core tenets of the way I like to organize and that I believe in organizing is that you have to do it with integrity. And in order to do it with integrity, you need to respect. And I also, for me personally, believe you have to love the people that you're organizing for and with. And that's the kind of mentality that has to get taken into these conversations. Folks need to feel like they're respected. They need to feel like they're loved. That doesn't mean that there aren't hard conversations to have. And, those are conversations that don't need to take place in public necessarily. We're not here to make folks feel ashamed of themselves. We're here to sort of shine a light on things. And we're here to have real conversations. And I think, to sort of give a nod to somebody else who has been doing some of this work, specifically in Black male communities, Phil Agnew with Black Men Build, does a lot of this type of work. And I think it's really special. It's also really hard. And most people don't want to see what those conversations look like. And they shouldn't, because we need to move people. We're this is hearts and minds work. And hearts and minds work requires hard conversations that happen between people who feel like they trust each other. And so I think the hope is that we can stay in formation in some way, shape, or form after the election and continue to do this during the election. I think one of the things we really want to make sure that we're also doing this election is creating visibility and through that visibility, a permission structure for white men to see other white men out there who support Kamala Harris and feel like then it is okay for them to also support her in their local communities. Because the real work this is how the real work always happens. It's individuals having conversations with other individuals. That is how change ultimately gets made. And that can manifest in 1,000 different ways. It can happen online through WhatsApp groups. It can happen on the phone. It can happen in person. But ultimately, the work is the same. It's people talking to people.
Yeah, you brought up something of such a great point. Phil Agnew, I've interviewed him a number of times. When I first met him, he was co-directing Dream Defenders. They're out of Florida. And so he is a career organizer. He was one of the faces that was in Ferguson during the uprisings there. And so he's doing Black Men Build. I could definitely relate to that because he has his own work that he's doing with Black men. And a lot of that deals with gender, right? And what I like about what you said about not the shaming of people and creating a space where people can have these conversations, out of that, we also have to remember that every person can't have every conversation. So one of the challenges that I've had, even within Black male groups, is that I'm a queer Black man. And so there's just a certain way that straight men think that I have no relation to whatsoever. The way that I look at safety and security is just vastly different. I have no type of personal presence where I can relate to somebody who I think says something harmful or damaging, right? What was beautiful about these different groups for Kamala was that there was a Black gay man or LGBTQ call that Don Lemon was leading and other people were living, and one of my closest friends was a part of that call. Now, that's something that I can relate to. And so what I think is beautiful about what you're doing is that you are creating these spaces so that people can have dialogues. When I was covering the 2016 election, I remember very clearly that me telling my white editors that I will not cover a Trump rally because psychologically I knew I could not be either professional enough. I had not developed the emotional maturity in order to deal with that much trauma that they would bring to me. And they respected me enough to do that. And so I am not, and what's really interesting about that is that I live in Ukraine. And some of these conversations that you're talking about, the safe space, I have Ukrainians say all types of crazy stuff to me about race all the time, but I'm built for that particular type of conversation. And so I really I really think that you're providing opportunities for people to find their way, to get information, including getting people who are skilled at talking to those particular type of white men who may say things that may impact me to the point where I won't be affected, but that other person will. But it took people like you to do that work because, see, I can't do it. In reality, I shouldn't be asked to. No more than Andrea should be asked to help men deal with their sexism. That's not her responsibility. I know it's not a question. I'm just happy that you are doing that work because we keep asking, where the white men, and you're doing it. And we need to recognize that you're doing it because it's very crucial that you are convincing these men that our ascent as people of color and as women in this country doesn't equal their downfall.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I think about a lot I think especially sort of like in progressive spaces, and I talk to my wife about this on a pretty regular basis, is the idea that at a fundamental level, the work that I try to do in the world, whether it's like White Dudes for Harris, Run for Something, other things, is about trying to create something that hasn't existed, at least not in modern like times. And what I'm not trying to do is recreate the same systems that we already have with a different group of people on top. And the people I try to organize with are the people who are trying to create the thing that doesn't exist today, where everybody is treated with dignity, everybody is treated with respect, everybody is treated the way they want to be treated, and that our structures and government and culture are all reflective of that. And I think the thing I would add to it is, because I think this is a really important piece, especially, and this is not just for white men, this is, I think, for all men. I consider many parts of traditional masculinity to essentially be far-right ideology.
Absolutely.
At this point. And what it does is it creates sameness. It sort of destroys the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then when like the individual has sort of like the things that are unique about that person have sort of been like torn apart, it acts out upon other people. And that's when you start to see both physical and emotional violence, those types of things. And it all sort of stems from this idea that that men can't be who they are on the inside and reflect that on the outside without fear or shame. And, I told a part of an anecdote on the call. I didn't go into a ton of detail, but I had a close friend growing up, middle and high school. He went down a pretty dark path that led to substance abuse. It led to domestic violence. It sort of ended with him taking his own life after he got out of prison. And we later found out it was because he was gay and didn't know what to do with it. He didn't feel like he could talk to anyone about it. He felt ashamed of himself. And I think you can replace the specific, that story is not an uncommon story. You could also replace one or two details with some other specific details and then tell that story a million times across the United States and honestly across the world at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the world that I think we need is one where men feel like they can just be who they are. Whatever masculinity, like whatever that manifests, however that manifests for them. It's not my job specifically to judge how somebody's masculinity manifests as long as it's not harming others and it's not coercive. People just need to be able to be who they are. They need to feel like they can be themselves out in the world. And I think if we get to that place, I think if we can get to that place, a lot of the problems that we have in society, they don't all go away, but a lot of them start to, that, and I should say class, race, socioeconomic status, lived experience, all of those things sort of like play a role in like a bunch of in a lot of these things. And so the work that you have to do for like middle class white dudes is not the same work you need to do for working class white dudes, which is not the same work you need to do for like Black men, which is not the same work you need to do for Latino men. It just, people's lived experience will manifest these things differently. But I think the core thing that has to happen like remains pretty consistent.
I just wanted to add, Andrea and Ross, I came in tune with my queerness at 42 years old when I was here in Ukraine when the war started, ironically. And so why this is so germane to this larger conversation about the white men for Trump dialogue, so much of this is about misogyny and the way that men are supposed to function, and that it informs our political behavior. And so I'm sorry about this friend of yours, that went through this dark space. And Black men and white men, we experience these types of discoveries of our identities very differently. And so even if we take away the sexuality part out of it and really narrow in and hone into our conversation about the white men for Trump, so much of these things about misogyny and sexism,
and
homophobia, these are white supremacist constructs, right?
Well, they exist in a lot of countries around the world.
It exists in a lot of countries around the world. And I would dare say, respectfully, may have been the undoing, unfortunately, of your friend, right? Because because sexism, misogyny, all these things, they hurt us. Mm-hmm. So, as
hurt
men,
the collective as well as destroy the individual.
Yeah. And so this person like Kamala, that's why I was going back to the genesis, like the original question. It brought me so much hope that these white men see a future that is led by this Black woman. And I feel encouraged to I don't know how the hell I would do it, but to assist you, and just, even if it's just me getting on a phone call and talking with you about how can we make this work? Because those white people I saw in West Virginia, they need to be voting for Kamala.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there is no way that a white man grows up in a similar type of poverty as me. Black folk, we have a joke about white poverty just for joke. It's like, it's a waste of white skin. Like, that's how we literally say, because you're not supposed to be like us. And those white men are supposed to take care of you. We know they're not taking care of us. And so I had no answer in 2018 about these white men. But if there's anything that I could do to mobilize and have these cross-sectional, intersectional conversations, I think it's healthy for all of us. And I think people need to continue to build on what you're doing and support you in what you're doing, because the work that you're doing is going to help me. It's going to help Andrea, right? You're taking the lead. That's the main thing. We're not taking the lead, right? You're taking the lead, but any secondary support that we do, even having this conversation, I hope people who are listening, they'll tell their friends, they'll tell their family, so that they can see the light as well, because you're trying to direct them to it, right? They'll listen to you.
You're our white male translator.
I've been working in the movement for a long time, and, I'm an organizer. So like before I did the call, I called a lot of people, I phoned a lot of friends, and basically I got the same response from every single person I talked to, which is someone has to do it, and it needs to be, and it can't be us. Like, we can't organize white men. You guys got to organize yourselves. You got, I got told multiple people, like, you got to go collect your people. And I think that part of it is important. And it's also like, it makes folks uncomfortable. Like, it just does. White people, I've said this a million times at this point, like, usually when white dudes organize, it's with pointy hats on. And
or Brooks Brother khakis and tiki torches.
Yeah. And so we don't have a muscle for this on the left. It's going to feel uncomfortable because we're just not used to like white dudes organizing like for the common good. We're used to like white dudes organizing for their own good. And I think this is a place where the common good and self-interest are actually aligned, because at the end of the day, the problems that men face aren't going away. They're only going to get worse over time if we don't address them. And I think we're starting to see that. I think politics is a manifestation of those things, but politics is not the core problem. So like, the gender gap for Gen Z men and boys, like growing the way that it has over the last 4 years, I think is just like a symptom of an underlying set of problems that like we ultimately do need to address. Because if we don't address it, things are only going to get worse and worse. And we're going to lose an entire generation of folks. And once you lose them, it's real hard to get them back. I think that's the crux of it. Like once someone goes down one of those dark paths, once they end up in the manosphere, once they end up sort of in MAGA world, once, they end up like watching Andrew Tate videos, it's really hard to pull them back from those things. And so we actually have to get to folks before that happens. And the way that we do it is by creating space for them and giving them an alternative to Jordan Peterson. Now, I think the thing that makes folks like Jordan Peterson really appealing is that they're really structured. I would say 50% of the things that Jordan Peterson says are things like wake up early, make your bed, have a routine, have a job, like create structure in your life. Then the other half of the things he says are, it's all your problems are women's fault. So we need to start creating alternatives and space where folks can hear the things that they like need to hear, but we're not going to like go out there and be scapegoating folks. I think the thing about the manosphere, the thing about sort of like far right ideology is they are giving people things that they want and need. Everybody wants a sense of community. Everybody wants to feel a sense of belonging. Everybody wants to feel in obligation to something bigger than themselves. And that's what these folks are doing. They're just also then saying it's immigrants' fault, it's like Black people's fault, it's women's fault, and like putting people into a really destructive spiral. And, I think the left is honestly like the best sort of like word I can conjure for it. But I don't know that I totally mean it in the traditional sense of, like left-right ideology. But like the people who are not like the far-right folks, we need to be creating those types of spaces too. And I think that was a big reason why we wanted to do this call. And hopefully it's like the start of something much bigger.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Ross. We want to have you back on again. This is just the start of a much larger conversation. Consider yourself a regular now.
I love it.
And we love you. We're so grateful. I plug the shit out of your organization all the time on Gaslit Nation. I link to you guys on our website for folks to donate to. So, and thanks for creating this generational change of creating all these new leaders coming up in our country that are going to build a totally new America rising from the ashes. You're really doing the Lord's work out there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And come back again to Gaslit Nation.
I'd love to, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level and higher on Patreon at patreon.com/gaslit. Fascists like J.D. Vance hate women and don't understand how a woman's body works. So donate to the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project that provides support to those who need an abortion or emergency contraceptives, because abortion is healthcare. Donate at WRRAP.org. That's WRRAP.org. To help Ukraine with urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To help refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our production manager is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Ice Bear is Defiant, Work for Better, Prep for Trouble, Lily Wachowski, John Schoenthaler, Ellen McGirt, Larry Gasson, D. Scott, Ann Bertino, David East, Joseph Mara Jr., Mark, Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, Kevin Gannon, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Golstad, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, Ann Marshall, D.L. Singfield, Nicole Spear, Abby Rode, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Sarah Gray, Diana Gallagher, Leah Campbell, Jared Lombardo, Ann Marshall, Abby Zavos, and Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.